Welcome back to the exam preparation video series for DP-300, Administrating Microsoft Azure SQL Solutions. I'm Sara, a Microsoft Technical Trainer, and this is our third episode out of the total 5 episodes in this series. In this episode, we'll focus on monitoring and configuring and optimizing database resources. We will cover how to monitor resource activity and performance, monitor and optimize query performance, and configure database solutions for optimal performance as well. Here is a list of all the different skills you may be tested on. These are sometimes referred to as the may include, meaning they may or may not be on the exam. This list isn't exhaustive, and while we won't be covering every skill in this video, be sure you can perform these skills before taking the exam. For the DP-300 exam, understanding performance baseline is critical for diagnosing SQL Server performance issues. So know the key areas to monitor: storage, memory, and compute. Understand how to interpret these counters. For example, high disk latency can show us that there's some storage performance bottlenecks, or maybe page life expectancy, which helps assess memory pressure. Another concept to know here is the different sources of performance metrics for SQL Server in Azure. We have some Azure metrics, which are ideal for Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance. We have the SQL Server metrics, which are useful for SQL Server VMs and managed instances as well. So don't confuse Azure metrics with SQL Server internal metrics. Azure metrics are collected through Azure Monitor. SQL Server metrics are collected using DMVs and Performance. We also need to understand the monitoring solutions available for those different SQL deployment models. Don't confuse here query performance insight with query store. Query store retains execution history. Query performance gives us insights and provides high-level insights in the Azure portal. So be aware of Azure SQL Insights versus Azure SQL Analytics, which also gives us direct monitoring. And Azure SQL Analytics kind of uses a log-based monitoring. So if asked about on-prem monitoring, remember also that SQL Insight requires an agent, and Azure SQL Analytics does not support VMs. You also must know the performance configuration and monitoring in SQL Server and Azure SQL. So for example, configuring performance using either Resource Governor, which controls CPU and memory allocation for workloads and for monitoring performance. We can use Azure Monitor and DMVs to also track those SQL workloads and system performances as well. Another tool here to use is the Database Watcher, which gives us deep insights into SQL performance across multiple databases. So know how Database Watcher works. For example, it helps us and provides us with some heat maps and dashboards to identify those bottlenecks. Also, be aware of key monitoring insights for CPU and memory usage. Look at query performance and weights, and also understand the role of a watcher database, which stores and processes collected telemetry. So previously we mentioned Database Watcher for SQL monitoring, but we also have another essential tool for performance troubleshooting, which is extended events. Know how extended events work, and also the key use cases. So for example, we can use it with monitoring DDN changes, troubleshooting blocking and deadlocking, and also know why we use extended events. This actually helps us lower overhead and process data asynchronously for efficient analysis. And it even helps integrate with existing ECW tools for enhanced diagnostics as well. With extended events, we're using this for monitoring. Now let's look at Query Store, your go-to tool for tracking query performance over time. So know the steps on how to enable Query Store and know when to use Query Store. For example, we can use this to identify top queries over a set period of time. We can also look at audit query plans history to detect regression. So be aware that Query Store is off by default on SQL Server, but on for Azure SQL Database. We've covered enabling Query Store. Now let's focus on how to monitor and troubleshoot performance issues using some built-in reports. So key query store reports, we have regressed queries, which identify queries with degraded performance, overall resource consumption, which analyze database performance-wide trends. So know the steps on troubleshooting workflow with these query store. After understanding queries performance with query store, let's now focus on session blocking and deadlocks. This is critical for database performance troubleshooting. So know the different types of locks you need to know. For example, the shared, which is used for read operation and prevents data modification. Also know the difference between deadlocks versus blocking and the two key ways to monitor blocking scenarios, which is using the DMV or using something like extended events, which is best for capturing and diagnosing deadlocks in real time. After detecting those blocking issues, you have to focus on identifying performance bottlenecks. Also, again, using those dynamic management views. So know what DMVs help you monitor. For example, CPU performance issues. We know that we can identify queries consuming high CPU using this report, or also be prepared to analyze DMV outputs. You might get scenario-based questions requiring interpretation of those DMV data. Once performance issues are identified, your next step is optimizing queries using intelligent indexing and tuning. So be aware of the key index optimization tools. We have query performance insights, automatic tuning, advanced monitoring and tuning as well. Be aware of automatic tuning. It can create and drop indexes dynamically based on query workload patterns. Understand query performance insights, how it helps identify queries with the highest resource consumption. With Azure SQL Database, we have also built-in performance tuning. Those recommendations that can help optimize query execution. Know about the performance recommendation options. And be aware that these recommendations apply only to single and pooled databases in Azure SQL Database, not managed instances. Also understand parameterization in queries, explicit versus forced, and how these can impact query plan reuse. Those execution plans are critical for SQL Server performance tuning. So the DP-300 exam, we expect you to analyze and compare execution plans effectively. Know the different types of execution plans. It's also important to understand actual versus estimated plans, because the exam may ask you when to use each. We also have intelligent insights, which continuously monitor the Azure SQL Database using AI to detect performance issues and those disruptive events. We have those intelligent assessments with actionable recommendations. So for Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance, you can use the Database Watcher as the preferred monitoring solution. For Azure SQL Server on an Azure VM, you can use this SCOM Managed Instance with SQL Server Management Pack. So know basically how Database Watcher differs from the other monitoring solutions. After looking at those performance bottlenecks, you can use intelligent insights. And the next step is kind of index maintenance. How do we do proper index management and how to help optimize query performance and storage efficiency? So understand when to use reorganize versus rebuild. Know also how to alter index options and how that impacts performance and storage. And expect scenario-based questions on index fragmentation thresholds. Once you're done maintaining those indexes, the next critical step is statistics maintenance. So keeping statistics up to date helps SQL Server Query Optimizer generate those best execution plans. Know when to update statistics manually versus relying on auto-update. Understand how outdated statistics can also negatively impact query performance. Next, the DBCC checkDB. This is a primary command that we need to know for verifying database integrity in SQL Server. This helps detect corruption and logical inconsistencies and also potential kind of storage issues. So know the key operations performed by this command. Also note that you do not need to run these commands separately. DBCC checkDB includes all of them in one single execution. Next, we focus on optimizing performance through automatic tuning. Know that automatic tuning ensures database dynamically adapt to changing workloads. and optimizing this performance with, again, AI-driven recommendation. So just note the automatic tuning options and understand when to enable or disable automatic tuning settings. Optimizing SQL Server configuration settings, again, is also essential for performance tuning, so especially in Azure virtual machines. So in the exam, we expect you also to understand best practices for enabling, disabling, and managing those key settings. So know when to enable or disable key settings, understand log management. Large logs can lead to bottlenecks, and the exam might test your ability to optimize log file performance. So be prepared to configure memory settings and just know how to set memory limits and optimize SQL Server for Azure Virtual Machine, how this is a tested concept. Next, Resource Governor, which helps manage SQL Server workloads. We do this by controlling CPU, memory, input-output consumption at the instance level. So know why we use Resource Governor, how it helps us ensure predictable performance and SLAs, and kind of isolates the runaway queries. We also need to know about database scoped configurations and how they let you fine-tune performance at the database level using the alter database command. So know the common settings for the exam, for example, maxstop, and how that controls parallel query execution. Another key concept here is choosing the right compute and storage tier, which is critical for performance and cost efficiency. So compute tiers to know. You need to know about serverless, general purpose. We also need to know about the business critical and also hyperscale. Lastly, know the IQP features, for example, adaptive query processing, and also know about approximate query processing as well. So expect scenario-based questions on when to use them. To recap, in this episode, we discussed how to monitor resource activity and performance, monitor and optimize query performance, and configure database solutions for optimal performance. Remember, this group accounts for 20 to 25% of the exam, so keep that in mind when preparing for your exam. Thank you for watching episode 3 on monitoring, configuring, and optimizing database resources. Also, be sure to join us for episode 4, where we cover configuring and managing automation of tasks.